Admiral Zexel, a high-ranking officer of the Galactic Conrad, adjusted his ceremonial sash for the 7th time in as many minutes. The noise and flashing lights of the human entertainment center surrounded him. His sensitive antenna twitched in discomfort. He could barely hear himself think as the sounds of laughter, cheers, and electronic beeps filled the air. Zexel had never liked these human entertainment centers. He much preferred the quiet, controlled environments of his ship. His diplomatic mission was important, and being surrounded by the chaos of human leisure seemed like a waste of time. But this was necessary. The purpose of his visit was clear. He had come to evaluate humanity's readiness for interstellar cooperation. After all, they had asked for it. Their ambassadors had expressed their desire to join the Galactic Concordat. Zexel had been tasked with observing their cultures, behaviors, and most importantly, their military potential. This was why he was in the Galaxy Games arena, an establishment that seemed to mix amusement with competition. At first, he had laughed at the name. Galaxy Games. The very idea seemed childish. His people no longer wasted time on such pursuits. They had long ago abandoned games in favor of practical simulations and rigorous training. But as Zexel looked around, he reminded himself that his mission was to understand every part of human society, even the frivolous ones. If he was going to judge their readiness for galactic cooperation, he needed to be thorough. So, here he was, surrounded by human children playing what appeared to be some kind of combat simulation game. He walked through the crowded space, towering over the humans with his iridescent, tall form. His presence caught the attention of some of them, their eyes widening with curiosity as they glanced at him. His antenna twitched nervously as he weaved through the children. They looked so carefree. Their energy was wild, untamed, like a group of young animals on a hunt. Zexel had seen it all before. He had observed similar crowds in many other alien worlds. Yet something about this place was different. The human children gathered around a specific corner of the arena caught his attention. Their faces were focused. Their excitement was more than just a display of youthful energy. It was a kind of intensity. Zexel's antenna twitched again as he drew closer, intrigued despite himself. What was it that drew the children to this part of the arena? The game they were watching appeared to be an interactive Starship simulator. The holographic display was a blur of motion as ships raced across a virtual space, dodging enemy fire and navigating asteroid fields. Zexel's sharp eyes observed the scene closely. This wasn't a typical game. No, this was different. The hologram before him showed a young human girl, probably around 12 cycles old, with dark hair tied back in a practical style. Her fingers danced across the controls, her focus unwavering. She was completely absorbed in the simulation, her face set in a serious expression. The game's computer system called out warnings. Warning, hostile craft detected in Sector 7. Zexel's antenna twitched with interest. The human girl's reaction was immediate. Her fingers flew across the interface as the ship she controlled performed perfect tactical maneuvers. It was flawless. Zexel took a deep breath and took another step closer, feeling the tension build. He had been trained in military strategy for cycles, and even he found himself impressed by the precision with which this young girl navigated her ship. Her movements on the screen were so swift, so well coordinated. It was as though she had already mastered advanced techniques that would take most galactic officers years to learn. In fact, some of the maneuvers she performed were techniques Zexel himself had struggled to perfect during his academy years. And here was this human girl, doing them effortlessly. He was in awe, but something inside him stirred. Was this just a fluke, or was this child an anomaly in human development? "Sarah's going for the record again," one of the children nearby whispered excitedly. Zexel didn't need to be told. He had already noticed the girl's unusual skill. Sarah. The name lingered in his thoughts. It was odd to think that such a young human could be so capable. The more Zexel observed, the more he began to realize that this wasn't just a game. It was a training ground, a testing ground for something far greater. The game's announcer, a calm, professional voice, spoke again. Nebula sequence approaching. Hostile craft incoming. The screen shifted, and Zexal could see the virtual nebula swirling with colorful gases, a complex pattern of shifting clouds. He could almost feel the tension in the air, as if the nebula itself was alive. Sarah didn't hesitate. She immediately adjusted her ship's vector, guiding it toward the nebula. Her fingers flew over the controls, and Zexal was astonished. This was no simple move. This was advanced tactics, the kind of strategy that could save lives in real space battles. She was using the nebula's electromagnetic fields to mask her ship's engine signature, a technique Zexal had perfected during the Proxima campaign. And yet, Sarah executed it with a fluidity that left him stunned. The virtual enemy ships lost track of her. Sensor efficiency reduced to 30%, the computer announced. Zexal's antenna twitched. He could see that this child, this Sarah, was no longer just playing a game. She was demonstrating a level of skill that could rival even the best pilots in the galaxy. The children around him cheered. "Sarah's the best," they exclaimed. But Sarah was already focused on the next phase of the simulation. She was unshaken by their praise, her attention solely on the task ahead. Zexal, still standing behind her, couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. What kind of mind was this young human capable of? What potential did humanity hold? The human children cheered again as Sarah completed another successful maneuver, but Zexal stood still, processing everything he had seen. He couldn't shake the thought. The tactical abilities Sarah demonstrated weren't just impressive, they were extraordinary. And yet, they were being showcased in the most unlikely of places, a human entertainment center. The contrast between the simplicity of the setting and the complexity of the skills displayed by this young girl made him wonder, was this what humanity had to offer the galaxy? Could they be more than just a species on the brink of joining interstellar alliances? Were they already capable of greatness? As Sarah's ship completed another maneuver, Zexal couldn't help but feel that the humans were ready for something much bigger than anyone had realized. The question now was, would the galaxy be ready for them? Zexal wasn't sure. But as he watched Sarah expertly navigate the simulation, he knew one thing for certain. Humanity's readiness for the stars was no longer just a question. It was a matter of when, not if. Admiral Zexal's thoughts continued to swirl as Sarah's starship raced across the screen, her fingers still flying across the controls with effortless precision. The young girl's every move was calculated, perfect. Zexal stood frozen in place, his antennae twitching with both awe and confusion. This human child, no older than 12 standard cycles, had mastered techniques that would take most seasoned pilots years to learn. He had expected to witness a display of chaotic energy, typical of human children. Instead, he had stumbled upon something far more complex, a skill that rivaled even the most advanced training programs in the galaxy. "Would you like to try, sir?" Sarah's voice cut through the Admiral's thoughts, pulling him back into the present. She had turned in her seat, a bright smile lighting up her face. Zexal, still processing what he had just witnessed, found himself momentarily speechless. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. The human child wasn't intimidated by his towering form or the importance of his position. Instead, she was offering him a chance to join the game, as if they were equals. Zexal hesitated. He was here to evaluate humanity, not to play games. But there was something about Sarah's confidence that made him reconsider. This wasn't just any ordinary game. This was a test, a trial that showcased far more than the child's ability to handle a joystick. He had to know more. With a tentative step forward, Zexal took a seat beside her, his iridescent form casting a shadow over the interface. The controls felt awkward in his many hands, unfamiliar and crude compared to the advanced systems he was used to operating. But he was a trained strategist. A little discomfort wouldn't stop him from uncovering the full extent of humanity's potential. The screen flickered, and the game continued. A hostile ship appeared on the horizon. The computer's calm voice issued a warning. Warning, hostile craft detected in Sector 12. Preparing for combat. Zexel's antennae flicked in surprise. The stakes had just been raised. He glanced at Sarah. She remained focused, her fingers already working the controls. She had no doubt that she would succeed. "Stay calm, Admiral," Sarah said, her voice steady, like a seasoned pilot. Zexel blinked. It was rare for someone to speak to him in such a direct, no-nonsense way. But here, in this strange human game, there was no formality. There was only the challenge ahead. Zexel's first instinct was to fire at the enemy craft, to destroy it with the weapons at his disposal. But Sarah's hand stopped him before he could press the button. "That's not the way to win," she said. "We need to outsmart them." Outsmart them? Zexel thought, his brow furrowing. This was not how he would have approached the situation. His tactical training focused on overwhelming force and precision. He hadn't expected to learn about subtlety from a human child. But as Sarah continued to guide her ship, Zexel realized she wasn't using force. She was using her mind. She steered the ship into an asteroid field, weaving expertly between the rocks. The hostile craft followed, but they couldn't match her agility. Sarah's fingers danced across the interface, manipulating the ship's trajectory with ease. The enemy ship fired, but the blasts missed by a wide margin. Zexel's antennae twitched with admiration. This child was doing something no seasoned officer would have attempted. She was using the terrain to her advantage, outsmarting her opponent without firing a single shot. "This is how you do it," Sarah said, her voice calm and confident as she dodged yet another missile. Zexel was still stunned. Was this how humans fought? Could they really outthink their enemies instead of simply overpowering them? The enemy ship, growing frustrated, began to take more reckless shots, trying to lock onto Sarah's ship. The computer issued warnings, but Sarah didn't panic. Instead, she deployed a series of decoys, confusing the hostile ship's targeting system. As the enemy fired at empty space, Sarah guided her ship toward a narrow opening between two massive asteroids. The hostile ship, unable to keep up, crashed into one of the rocks and exploded in a bright flash. "Level complete," the game's voice announced. "New high score achieved. Tactical rating: superior." The children around them erupted in cheers, but Sarah remained calm. She didn't even look at the scoreboard. She was already preparing for the next level. Zexel leaned back in his seat, still processing what had just happened. This was no ordinary game. Sarah had done something extraordinary. She had shown him a new side of humanity, something more than just their ability to adapt and survive. They had the ability to think, to strategize, to use their minds to outsmart even the most powerful of enemies. He could see the potential in her, and in the humans. This was what he had been sent to evaluate. It wasn't just their strength or their technology. It was their intelligence, their capacity for innovation, for creative thinking in the face of adversity. In that moment, Zexel understood why the Galactic Concordat had been so interested in humanity. They were more than just a species on the edge of interstellar cooperation. They were a species with the potential to reshape the galaxy. The realization hit him hard. If this was what a human child could do in a simple game, what could they do in real combat? What could they do if they were truly tested, if they faced the full weight of the galaxy's challenges? The possibilities were endless. Zexel looked at Sarah, still focused on her next challenge. "You've got skills, human," he said, his voice filled with respect. Sarah glanced at him and smiled, a simple, humble expression that only added to her mystery. "I'm just getting started, Admiral," she replied. "Welcome to the game." Admiral Zexel sat back in his seat, still processing everything he had just witnessed. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, his usual calculated strategies now feeling somewhat outdated compared to the tactics Sarah had demonstrated. He had expected to find weaknesses in humanity, but what he discovered was a brilliance that, if nurtured, could make them formidable allies, or dangerous enemies. His antennae twitched with a mixture of curiosity and unease. "Ready for the next round, sir?" Sarah's voice interrupted his thoughts, cheerful and unbothered by the fact that a high-ranking officer was now sitting next to her in a human entertainment center. Zexal blinked, his iridescent form glowing in the dim light of the Galaxy Games arena. He had spent years studying military strategy and tactics, yet this young human girl had shown him something entirely new. In a simple game, she had executed maneuvers that took him years to master. He had to know more. The next level began, and once again, Zexal was struck by how the game wasn't just about pressing buttons. It was a simulation of real-world warfare, teaching the player to think beyond the immediate threat, to anticipate, and to adapt. Sarah didn't rely on brute force or weaponry. She relied on intelligence, quick thinking, and a deep understanding of the environment around her. The screen flickered, and another hostile ship appeared in the distance. This time, the enemy was stronger, bigger, faster, and equipped with advanced weaponry. The challenge was much greater, but Zexal noticed something different in Sarah's approach. She wasn't intimidated. Instead, she analyzed the situation, her fingers moving rapidly across the console as she calculated her next move. "This one's a little tougher," she said, her voice calm, betraying no sign of panic. "But we've got this." Zexal watched as Sarah's ship veered toward the enemy craft, but instead of engaging directly, she used the surrounding debris, floating rocks and space wreckage, to her advantage. She didn't fire a single shot. Instead, she maneuvered through the field with such precision that the enemy couldn't track her. Each move was deliberate, calculated, almost like a chess game. The hostile ship fired several rounds, but Sarah deftly avoided them, using the debris as cover. The enemy ship's weapons locked onto empty space as Sarah's ship glided past unnoticed. Zexal's eyes narrowed, impressed. It was a strategy he knew well. A distraction, a feint designed to mislead the enemy into wasting their firepower. "What's next, human?" Zexal asked, his voice low but filled with genuine interest. This wasn't the same war Zexal was accustomed to, where force and firepower ruled the battlefield. This was something different, something smarter. Sarah was teaching him that strategy didn't always require overwhelming power. It required creativity and foresight. "Next, we trap them," Sarah replied, her tone steady and focused. Zexal didn't quite understand. He had seen Sarah's tactics at work, but trapping an enemy seemed too simple. The galaxy had seen battles of immense scale, wars that had lasted centuries, fought with fleets of ships and entire planets as the stakes. The thought of trapping an opponent with nothing but a small ship and the environment around them seemed laughable at first. But Sarah's eyes gleamed with something Zexal couldn't quite place: confidence, determination, and perhaps a bit of youthful arrogance. He had to admit he was intrigued. As if reading his thoughts, Sarah's ship made a sharp turn, heading toward a massive asteroid that loomed in the distance. Zexal's antennae twitched in alarm. "You're not seriously thinking of flying into that, are you?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Sarah didn't respond. She just kept her focus on the asteroid, her fingers moving faster now as the hostile ship continued to pursue them. With every passing moment, Zexal could feel the tension rising. Sarah's ship flew toward the asteroid, its proximity alarming. The enemy was gaining ground. Zexal could hear the hum of the hostile craft's weapons charging. And then, at the last moment, Sarah pulled a daring maneuver. She activated her ship's thrusters, sending it into a high-speed roll that brought it dangerously close to the asteroid's surface. For a split second, Zexal thought they would crash, but then the ship shot upward, narrowly avoiding disaster. The enemy ship, too focused on the target in front of it, failed to react in time. It collided with the asteroid, the impact causing an explosion that lit up the screen. Sarah had done it again. The hostile craft was destroyed, without firing a single shot. "Level complete," the computer announced in its calm, professional tone. New high score achieved. Tactical rating: superior. Zexal sat in stunned silence, his antennae twitching with both admiration and disbelief. The young human had just outsmarted an entire fleet. He had no words for what he had just seen. This wasn't just a game. This was a lesson in how to win wars without ever firing a weapon. For the first time, Zexal found himself questioning everything he had been taught. The Concordat's military doctrine, which relied heavily on firepower and overwhelming force, suddenly seemed outdated. Humanity's potential wasn't in their weapons. It was in their minds. This was a strategy the galaxy had never seen before, and Zexal realized just how dangerous it could be. He turned to Sarah, his voice filled with awe. "You're more than just a child, aren't you?" Sarah glanced up at him, her eyes bright with excitement. "I told you, Admiral, I'm just getting started." Zexal's thoughts raced. This wasn't a fluke. This child was showing him the future of warfare. And if humans could apply this kind of strategic thinking to real battles, they might just change the balance of power in the galaxy. The possibilities were endless. As the next level began, Zexal knew one thing for certain. Humanity was ready for interstellar cooperation. But what kind of alliance would the galaxy form with a species capable of such brilliant tactics? That he wasn't sure yet, but he was about to find out. The screen flickered again, signaling the start of another level. Admiral Zexal leaned forward, watching with keen interest as Sarah prepared her ship for the next challenge. He had already seen enough to know that her skills were extraordinary, but what puzzled him was the underlying question. How could a species so young, so seemingly untrained in the ways of war, exhibit such mastery over complex tactics? This wasn't just a game to her. It was a reflection of something far deeper. As Sarah maneuvered her ship into position, Zexal's thoughts drifted to the countless civilizations he had encountered throughout his career. He had seen advanced fleets and sophisticated war strategies, each one more destructive than the last. But none of them had been as subtle, as innovative, as human. Humanity's potential for growth was unlike anything he had ever witnessed. Another hostile craft detected. The game's computer voice echoed, snapping Zexal out of his thoughts. His gaze snapped back to the screen as a massive enemy warship appeared on the horizon. The ship was heavily armored, its weapons primed and ready. The situation was dire. It looked like Sarah was facing an overwhelming force, something Zexal was certain would force her to retreat. He'd seen this scenario play out in countless simulations, but Sarah didn't retreat. Instead, her fingers flew across the console with a calmness that Zexal could only envy. Her ship surged forward, closing the distance between her and the enemy vessel. Zexal's eyes widened in disbelief. There was no hesitation in her actions, no panic in her demeanor. This wasn't a child playing a game. This was a strategist, calculating her every move with precision. Sarah's ship darted in and out of the enemy's firing range, barely avoiding the deadly blasts. Zexal's antennae twitched as he analyzed her movements. She wasn't relying on the same brute force he had seen in so many other conflicts. She was using speed, agility, and timing. Her ship moved with the same finesse he had seen in the Concordat's top-tier pilots, who had spent decades perfecting their skills. The hostile warship fired another round, but Sarah had already anticipated the move. With a swift turn, she used the planet's gravity well to slingshot her ship out of the line of fire. The tactic was a textbook maneuver, one that Zexal had used in the Proxima campaign. But he had never seen it executed with such flair. "What is she doing?" Zexal muttered to himself, almost in awe. The enemy ship had been thrown off course by her brilliant move, and Sarah took full advantage of the situation. She launched a series of small, targeted plasma bursts that struck at the warship's weak points. Zexal's mouth dried as he saw the damage accumulate, the enemy ship's shields flickering and fading under the assault. "Direct hit," Sarah's voice was calm, almost detached. "Shields failing." Zexal leaned back, his glowing form illuminated by the flickering light from the screen. This was not the way of warfare he had known. This was a new approach, one that utilized the environment, the weapons, and the ships in ways he had never imagined. The child, Sarah, was using every element at her disposal: speed, timing, resourcefulness, to outwit an opponent far more powerful than herself. The enemy warship, now significantly weakened, attempted to counterattack, but Sarah was already on the move again. In a swift, decisive maneuver, she dodged a volley of plasma fire and sent her ship into a dive that took her deep into the atmosphere of the nearby moon. Zexal's heart raced. It was a dangerous move, but Sarah had something the enemy didn't: the confidence and precision to pull it off. The hostile ship followed her, foolishly thinking it could corner her. It was a mistake. Sarah triggered her ship's thrusters at just the right moment, sending it rocketing upward toward the ship's exposed underbelly. The warship, distracted by the chase, failed to react in time. "Plasma vent engaged," Sarah announced, her voice unwavering. A burst of superheated gas exploded from her ship, forcing the warship to momentarily lose its lock on her. The reaction was immediate. The enemy ship, unable to regain its targeting system, fired into empty space as Sarah's ship closed in. With expert precision, Sarah hit the weapons console, and a stream of energy shot out. The hostile ship's underbelly erupted in a burst of flames. It was over. Enemy destroyed. The computer chimed, its cold voice neutral in tone. Level complete. New high score achieved. Tactical rating: superior. Zexal sat motionless, staring at the screen. He had witnessed many battles in his life, but none like this. The way Sarah handled the situation was a textbook case of superior strategy. No amount of firepower or weaponry could have won this fight. It was Sarah's intelligence and ability to adapt that had carried her through. Zexal couldn't help but feel a growing sense of admiration. "This is incredible," Zexal whispered under his breath. His thoughts swirled with possibilities. If this was how humans approached warfare, then they might be a force to be reckoned with on a galactic scale. He had come to observe them, to determine whether humanity was ready for interstellar cooperation. But what he had learned in just a few short minutes had far surpassed his expectations. As the game moved on to the next level, Sarah didn't even pause to celebrate her victory. She simply prepared for the next challenge. Zexal, however, couldn't help but marvel at her poise and skill. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was a demonstration of how far humanity had come, and how far they could go. "I have underestimated you, human," Zexal said softly, more to himself than to Sarah. He didn't expect a response, but to his surprise, she turned to him with a grin. "Don't worry, Admiral. I'm just getting started." Zexal's antennae twitched again, this time in a mixture of respect and curiosity. This was only the beginning, and he was beginning to understand just how deep humanity's potential ran. It wasn't just about technology or firepower. It was about something more profound. It was about strategy, about intelligence, and about the endless possibilities of what a human mind could achieve. And for the first time in a long while, Zexal was eager to see what would come next. As the game continued, Admiral Zexal's attention never wavered from Sarah. Her movements were fluid, instinctive. Each decision she made seemed to flow effortlessly into the next. Her fingers glided over the controls, adjusting her ship's course and weapons with precision. Zexal, who had studied every facet of galactic warfare for centuries, found himself both impressed and bewildered by the young human's ability to think several steps ahead. However, despite his fascination with her skill, a sense of unease began to creep over him. As the game's levels grew more complex, the challenges Sarah faced became increasingly difficult. It was as if the game itself was evolving, presenting new threats and obstacles that seemed almost too precise, too advanced, for a simple simulation. Zexal had seen many games in his time, and none had ever behaved like this. It was as if the program was adapting to Sarah's every move, growing more dangerous in response to her brilliance. Zexal's antennae twitched nervously. Something was off. His gaze shifted to the crowd of young humans that had gathered around, their faces alight with excitement and awe. They cheered Sarah on, but Zexel's trained eyes scanned them carefully. Most of them were too focused on the screen to notice anything unusual, but a few were glancing toward him, their expressions full of curiosity. What was it that these children knew that he didn't? "Is she going to win again?" one of the children whispered, their voice a mixture of admiration and awe. Another child nodded enthusiastically. "She's the best. No one can beat her," they responded. Zexel's mind raced as he observed the growing tension in the air. The more he watched Sarah, the more he began to suspect that there was something more to this game than met the eye. Was it just a test of skill, or was there something deeper, something more dangerous at play? "Hostile fleet detected in Sector 9. The game's cold voice announced, breaking Zexel's concentration. His focus snapped back to the screen just in time to see a massive armada of enemy ships appear on the horizon. These weren't just regular enemies. They were larger, more advanced, and appeared to have an intelligence that went beyond simple programming. Zexel's heart skipped a beat. These ships, these weren't just part of the game. They were real. His eyes widened in disbelief. This wasn't a simulation anymore. The stakes were real. This wasn't a simple test of strategy or reflexes. Sarah was engaged in a real battle, a battle that could have deadly consequences. "Sarah, pull back," Zexel urged, though his voice was drowned out by the excitement of the crowd. His words, though urgent, were ignored. Sarah was focused entirely on the battle at hand. Her hands moved with incredible speed, directing her ship through an intricate maze of enemy vessels, her fingers flashing over the controls with the ease of a seasoned veteran. The enemy ships closed in, their weapons primed for attack. Zexel could see the sensors on his own ship flare with energy as if in warning. He'd fought in enough battles to recognize the deadly intent behind these ships. They were positioning themselves for a strike, an all-out assault on Sarah's ship. Sarah's face remained calm, almost serene, as she readied her own counterattack. The crowd's excitement grew louder, but Zexel could feel the weight of the situation settling in. He could see her strategy unfolding in front of him. But there was something deeper at play. The game was changing. "No, you have to get out of there," Zexel thought. But still, Sarah didn't seem to hear him. She was in control, or was she? Suddenly, without warning, the game's screen glitched. For a brief moment, the bright holographic display flickered and distorted, before returning to normal. But the momentary lapse was enough to send a chill down Zexel's spine. Something was terribly wrong. The energy readings were spiking, far beyond what was normal for this type of game. Before Zexel could process what was happening, Sarah's ship was surrounded by the enemy fleet. The holographic projectiles flying from both sides created a dazzling light show. But the Admiral knew it wasn't just entertainment. It was a trap. With a fierce determination, Sarah launched her ship into a spiraling dive, evading the incoming blasts with pinpoint accuracy. Zexel's antennae twitched as he realized that this was more than just a test. This was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. Then, a strange noise cut through the chaos. The sound was faint at first, barely perceptible, but it was there. It was a low hum, like the vibration of something large, something massive, something moving. The hairs on Zexel's neck stood up as the source of the hum became clearer. A massive ship appeared from the dark edges of the simulation's map, slowly moving toward Sarah's position. It was unlike anything Zexel had seen before, far larger than anything human or alien technology had produced. This ship was an enigma, a ghost ship with no visible markings or energy signatures. Zexel's mind raced. Was this part of the game? Or was this something far worse? A part of him wished he had never stepped foot into this human entertainment center. The stakes had escalated far beyond what he had anticipated. "Sarah, get out of there. This is real." Zexel fought desperately, but the young human girl remained focused, her eyes locked onto the enemy fleet, oblivious to the massive unknown vessel now bearing down on her. As the unknown ship closed in on Sarah's position, the crowd's cheers began to die down. They hadn't realized yet what was happening. But Zexal knew the truth. Something dark and dangerous was about to unfold, and Sarah's skill alone might not be enough to escape it. The game was no longer just a game. It was a test of survival. The massive, unknown ship loomed closer, its eerie presence casting a shadow over Sarah's ship, which was still in the midst of evading enemy fire. The holographic enemies continued to swarm around her, but now their movements seemed almost trivial compared to the colossal threat approaching. Admiral Zexal's mind raced as he tried to comprehend the situation. This wasn't part of the game. This was something far more serious. Sarah, you need to stop. This is not just a game anymore. Zexal's voice screamed silently in his mind, but the young human girl remained calm, her hands dancing across the controls with frightening precision. Her focus was unwavering, her every movement sharp and calculated. She was unaware of the unseen danger closing in on her. The giant ship on the edge of the simulation map had now almost fully materialized, its sleek, dark form glowing with an ominous light. The sensors on Zexal's console went haywire, sending off alarming signals. The ship emitted no energy readings, no communication signals, and its design was unlike anything Zexal had ever encountered. No known alien faction had ever built something like this. It was an enigma, a ghost ship. Zexal leaned in closer, his heart pounding as the enormous vessel began to move toward Sarah's location. In his many years of service, he had never experienced anything like this. Could this ship be real? Or was it another level of the simulation? Either way, the threat it posed was undeniable. The crowd, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued to cheer for Sarah. They didn't know what Zexal knew. The stakes had grown higher. The game wasn't just testing Sarah's skill, it was testing her ability to survive. And with each passing moment, it became clearer to Zexal that the young girl was in over her head. Sarah, listen to me. Zexal fought desperately, his mind racing as he tried to find a way to warn her. But before he could think of a solution, a chilling realization struck him. The unknown ship wasn't just a passive observer. It was actively targeting Sarah. Its weapons systems hummed to life, sending a pulse of energy toward the simulation space, briefly disturbing the game's graphics. Warning: hostile ship detected. Energy signature increasing. The game's voice announced coldly, oblivious to the reality that was unfolding. But the words had no impact on Sarah. She was still navigating her ship through the maze of enemy fire, unaware of the real danger behind her. Zexal's antennae twitched in alarm. He couldn't just stand by and watch anymore. He had to act. He glanced around the arena, his eyes darting to the various human observers who had gathered around to watch the game. They were all oblivious to the true threat, but Zexal wasn't so easily fooled. Without wasting another second, he stepped forward, his towering iridescent form moving through the crowd with purpose. He wasn't sure if Sarah would hear him, but he had to try. Sarah, he called out, his voice sharp, breaking through the chatter of the onlookers. Stop the game now. Sarah didn't even flinch at the sound of his voice. Her concentration was absolute, her gaze fixed on the screen, her hands working the controls with practiced ease. Zexal couldn't understand it. Did she not see the danger, or was she simply too focused to react? The unknown ship's energy pulses intensified, and the game's virtual systems began to glitch in response. The space around Sarah's ship distorted, the starry sky twisting into unnatural shapes. The sensors on Zexal's console screamed with alarms, but the game's computer remained eerily silent as it processed the anomaly. Zexal's mind spun with questions. Who, or what, was behind this strange ship? Was it human technology? Could it be a secret weapon? Or perhaps it was a warning? He couldn't be certain, but one thing was clear. This was no longer about a game. This was a battle for survival, and Sarah was right in the middle of it. As Sarah's ship dove deeper into the fray, the unknown vessel fired its first shot. A beam of bright, scorching energy shot out from its hull, striking the simulation's digital field. The energy wave rippled outward, shattering the virtual environment around Sarah's ship. The digital backdrop flickered and warped as the beam connected with the simulation's shield. The virtual enemies surrounding Sarah seemed to hesitate, their movements glitching before they vanished entirely. Zexal's eyes widened in shock. The game was collapsing, breaking apart under the force of the unknown ship's energy. It was as if the simulation itself was being overridden. The audience, still cheering and oblivious, continued to watch as the holographic world began to crack and dissolve. "Sarah, you have to listen to me now," Zexal shouted, his voice desperate. His antennae swiveled in agitation as the realization hit him. If the simulation collapsed entirely, everything in the arena, the ship, the people, everything, could be affected. This wasn't just a virtual reality. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous. If the ship continued its assault, it might tear apart the very fabric of the space they were in. Sarah's fingers stilled on the controls for the first time, and Zexal thought, just for a moment, that she had heard him. But then, her gaze flicked to the corner of the screen where the unknown vessel was closing in on her. Without hesitation, she initiated a series of evasive maneuvers, twisting her ship through space with incredible speed. She was acting as if she didn't even know the true nature of the threat. Her confidence and skill were beyond impressive, but now, Zexal realized, they might not be enough. The real enemy wasn't in the game, it was the ship itself. And if Sarah couldn't recognize that soon, this wouldn't just be a simulation, it would be the end of everything. The arena was electric with tension, and the once jubilant crowd had fallen eerily silent. The cheers that had filled the space moments before had turned into hushed whispers, each spectator sensing the shift in the atmosphere. They still believed this was just a game, but Admiral Zexal knew better. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him as he watched Sarah maneuver her ship with unyielding focus. The unknown ship, now only a few kilometers away from Sarah's craft, emitted a terrifying pulse of energy. It wasn't like any weapon the galactic species had ever encountered. The energy radiated in waves, distorting the digital space around them, tearing apart the virtual battlefield. Sarah's ship, now vulnerable, was caught in the ship's gravitational pull. It was clear that she was moments away from being enveloped in the strange vessel's field. "Sarah, stop!" Zexal's thoughts screamed louder, but he knew there was little time to act. The young girl's brow furrowed as she adjusted her ship's course, pushing the limits of the control interface. She was trying her best to outmaneuver the increasingly dangerous ship, but there was no escaping its advance. The ship's energy pulses were continuous now, blocking every possible route of escape. Zexal's heart pounded as he realized the truth. If Sarah didn't recognize the danger soon, she would be consumed by it. His antennae twitched as an idea sparked in his mind. He had no time to wait for the game's system to resolve itself, nor could he risk relying on the technology in front of him. This was no longer about tactics, it was about survival. Zexal had to act fast, and he had to act now. "Sarah!" Zexal finally shouted aloud, his deep voice echoing across the arena. It was a direct plea for her to listen. The young girl's fingers hesitated on the controls, and for the first time, she seemed to acknowledge the gravity of the situation. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but still carrying that same professional tone from earlier. She spun around to face the Admiral, confusion flickering in her eyes. "This is a simulation, right? Are you part of the game?" Zexal clenched his fists, the weight of the moment heavy on his chest. He couldn't afford to explain everything to her now. There was no time for that. The unknown ship had already begun its final assault. "Get out of the game, now," Zexal urged, his tone desperate. The crowd still had no idea what was happening, but the Admiral couldn't explain it in words they would understand. This was no longer about a training simulation. This was about a real-life catastrophic threat. Sarah blinked, the last remnants of her disbelief fading. She quickly looked back to the screen, realizing that the digital field around her was collapsing. The warning systems had activated, but they were no longer just about the game. They were an urgent call for action. "Shields at 30%, the computer reported. In a fraction of a second, Sarah's hands moved, instinctively activating a maneuver that Zexal had never seen before. She engaged the emergency backup system, a powerful burst of energy that propelled her ship backward with force. Her ship twisted in the air, narrowly avoiding a deadly blast from the unknown vessel. But the ship wasn't done. It launched another attack, and this time it was targeted directly at the heart of Sarah's craft. Zexal's eyes widened in realization. The ship wasn't just attacking the simulation. It was attacking the very fabric of reality. This wasn't part of the game. This was something far darker, far more deadly. Without thinking, Zexal reached for the nearest control panel. His long, iridescent fingers moved across the console in a blur of activity. The Admiral's eyes narrowed as he tapped into the arena's emergency override systems. If he couldn't stop this ship in the simulation, he would have to shut down the entire system manually. "Sarah, this ship, it's real. This isn't a game anymore," Zexal said, his voice tinged with urgency. He could feel the simulation systems beginning to fail, the boundaries between virtual and reality growing thin. "You need to stop now. Get out of the game before it's too late." The young girl's face flushed with a mix of determination and confusion. Her eyes flicked to the oncoming blast, then back to Zexal. She had a choice now. She could either trust the Admiral's warning or continue to fight. But Sarah wasn't a typical child. She wasn't afraid of danger. She was a fighter. And in that moment, she made a choice. "I can't stop now," Sarah said, her voice unwavering. "Not when I'm so close." Zexal watched in disbelief as Sarah turned back to the controls, prepared to face the unknown ship head-on. She wasn't giving up. The Admiral had seen bravery in countless soldiers across the galaxy, but he had never seen anything like this. As the two ships neared each other, the energy levels rising to a dangerous level, Zexal knew that Sarah wasn't just playing a game anymore. She was about to make the most dangerous decision of her young life. But just as the unknown ship prepared to unleash its final strike, the screen flickered. The energy pulses stopped. The ship froze, its ominous glow fading to nothing. The simulation, once on the brink of destruction, stilled in the moment. And then, as if nothing had happened, the lights of the arena brightened, and the crowd erupted into applause. The game had ended. Sarah had won. But Zexal wasn't so sure. He had felt the threat, the danger, the realness of the situation. Was this truly over, or had they just escaped the worst of what was yet to come? The Admiral stood frozen, watching the young girl. There was more to this human than he had realized. The game had been a test, but the true test was yet to unfold. Earth, it seemed, had more to offer than anyone could have imagined. And the unknown ship, it might have just been the beginning.